At a big family dinner in Kumasi, Ghana, Ao sat quietly at the end of the table, helping serve food and trying her best to smile. It had been a long day, and she was already tired. But then out of nowhere her husband Luoy stood up and shouted across the room, "Kneel down and apologize for your disrespect." The whole room went silent. Plates paused mid-air. Everyone stared at her. Ao's heart pounded. She looked around hoping anyone would say something. But they didn't. Some just looked away. Others raised their phones and started recording. What had she done? She'd only said, "I already served your uncle," when Luoy snapped at her for not jumping up quickly enough. But to him that was talking back. That was disrespect. And now, in front of over 20 relatives, cousins, aunties and elders, he wanted to make an example of her. With tears burning in her eyes, Ao slowly knelt down. Her hands shook as she whispered, "I'm sorry," not because she meant it, but because she knew she had to survive that moment. She bit her tongue. She kept quiet, because deep down she already had a plan. Ao knelt on the cold tile floor, her knees aching, her eyes full of tears. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, "I'm sorry." She wasn't sorry, not really. Not for speaking the truth. Not for refusing to be treated like a servant. But she knew she had no choice in that moment. This wasn't about pride. It was about survival. About buying herself time. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. Some amused, some cold, most indifferent. No one came to help her. No one stood up for her. Her own husband stood over her like a king demanding obedience. And she gave it to him. Not because he deserved it, but because she wasn't ready yet. Inside, her heart was breaking. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the silence. The silence of people who claimed to be family but chose comfort over justice. That silence screamed louder than Luoy's voice. And that silence stuck with her. When the dinner ended, Luoy acted like nothing had happened. He laughed with his uncles, clinked glasses with his cousins, and bragged about his well-behaved wife. Ao smiled too, but only with her mouth. Her eyes stayed empty. Her mind was somewhere else. She was already counting down the days. That night, while Luoy snored on the couch with the TV still playing football highlights, Ao sat alone in the spare room with her laptop. No one knew she was taking online MBA classes. No one knew she was saving every extra Sadie she could hide. No one knew she had already registered a small business name in secret. The woman who knelt that day wasn't weak. She was preparing. She was gathering her strength, her knowledge, her exit. She knew her time would come. And when it did, no one would ever forget the woman who once knelt in silence, because her rise would shake the very ground they made her bow on. Luoy loved showing off. At parties, family gatherings, even church events, he always made sure people saw Ao walking 2 steps behind him, quiet and polite. "She's the perfect wife," he'd boast, laughing with his friends. "She knows her place. No drama, no back talk." And they would nod in approval, saying how lucky he was to have such an obedient woman. Ao would smile and play her part. She cooked, served, cleaned, nodded when spoken to, and stayed out of arguments. To the world, she looked like the perfect puppet, calm, respectful, and controlled. But behind that smile was a fire burning quietly, and behind those quiet eyes was a woman writing her own story. Every night after Luoy had eaten and fallen asleep in front of the TV watching football, Ao would sneak into the spare room, shut the door quietly, and open her laptop. She wasn't just scrolling social media. She was studying. She had secretly enrolled in an online MBA program months ago, using part of her own savings, the little she was able to hide from him. No one knew. Not even her closest friends. She studied at midnight, wrote papers before dawn, and attended virtual lectures with her headphones on. While Luoy bragged about her silence, she was learning about finance, logistics, and business law. While he told people she had no ambition, she was quietly planning to start a company of her own. To him, she was his trophy. A woman who wouldn't challenge him. A woman who stayed in her lane. But Ao was never that woman. She just pretended to be, because pretending gave her access. Access to his world, his routines, and his weaknesses. Luoy thought he had full control. But the truth was, Ao was learning how to build something bigger than he could ever imagine. And while he laughed at football scores, she was preparing to score the biggest goal of her life, her freedom. Luoy trusted Ao with the family's paperwork. After all, she was just a wife. And in his eyes, not smart enough to understand real business. So when his relatives needed help organizing files, handling receipts or printing contracts, they gave everything to Ao without a second thought. She was quiet, respectful, and always available. Perfect for the job, they said. But what they didn't know was that Ao understood everything. Every number, every signature, every fake invoice, every payment made off the books. While she sorted through account statements and tax records, she started noticing things that didn't add up. Missing receipts, double entries, money moving through strange names and accounts. She didn't say a word. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she started saving copies. One by one, she created a hidden folder on her laptop, and then backed it up to an external drive she kept hidden inside an old bag under the bed. Ao didn't just save files. She organized them, labeled them, linked them to dates and names. She was building a quiet arsenal of truth. Sometimes her hands would shake as she clicked download. She knew what she was doing was dangerous. If Luoy ever found out, it could go very badly. But she kept going. Not out of revenge, but protection. Insurance. Power. The more she uncovered, the more she realized how deep the corruption ran. Tax evasion, bribery, secret property deals, and dirty political connections. And the worst part? Luoy walked around like a saint, even lecturing others about honesty and hard work. But Ao knew better now. She knew who he really was. And she also knew that if she ever wanted to walk away safely and on her own terms, she needed proof. Hard proof. Not just for herself, but for the day she'd expose the man who forced her to kneel. Quietly, carefully, she turned their secrets into her strength. The very files they trusted her with would one day become the same files that brought them down. It had been a long evening. Ao had helped plan the fundraiser, organize the guest list, and even manage the catering. She smiled through every conversation, poured drinks, and made sure Luoy looked good in front of everyone. He loved being the center of attention, shaking hands, taking pictures like a celebrity. To outsiders, they looked like a power couple, confident, successful, happy. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. When they got home that night, everything changed. They had just walked into the living room when his uncle followed behind. Ao was tired, her feet swollen from standing in heels all night. She sat on the couch for just a moment, her hands resting in her lap. That's when Luoy's face twisted in anger. "You didn't stand up when my uncle walked in," he snapped. Ao blinked, confused. "I didn't realize." Before she could finish, his hand flew across her face. The slap was loud, sharp. It echoed through the house like thunder. But Ao didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply turned her face back toward him, her cheek burning, her heart pounding in her chest. And then she said, in the calmest voice he'd ever heard, "Thank you for reminding me who you really are." Luoy stood there, stunned. He expected tears, fear, maybe an apology. But not that. Ao stood up slowly, looked him in the eye, and walked to the bedroom without another word. She didn't slam the door. She didn't raise her voice. But the morning after the slap, the house was quiet. The birds outside chirped like any normal day, and the sun peeked through the curtains as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something big. Because when Luoy woke up and called out for Ao, there was no answer. He checked the bedroom. Empty. The kitchen. Empty. Her phone was gone. Her clothes. Her suitcase. Even her toothbrush. Gone. There was no note. No message. No explanation. It was like she had vanished into thin air. First Luoy was confused. Then angry. He called her phone again and again, but it went straight to voicemail. He called her friends. Her sister. No one knew where she was. His voice started shaking. By afternoon, his mother and uncles were panicking too. They called the police and reported her missing. But Ao wasn't missing. She was free. Over 300 kilometers away, in the bustling city of Tamale, Ao stood in a small office with a new name on her ID and a new job as a logistics consultant. She had used everything she learned from her MBA and all the business experience she gained while managing Luoy's documents to build a new life, one step at a time. No one there knew her as the woman who knelt at a family dinner. They didn't know about the slap, the silence, or the tears. They only saw a focused, brilliant young woman who spoke with confidence and moved with quiet power. Ao kept her head down, worked hard, and stayed off social media. She changed her hairstyle, her clothes, even the way she walked. The old Ao, the one who used to wait for permission, was gone. She rented a small flat, lived simply and saved every coin. Her plan wasn't just to survive. It was to grow, to win, to become someone so strong, so unshakable, that if they ever saw her again, they wouldn't recognize her, until it was too late. In Tamale, far from the noise and shame of her past, Ao quietly built something powerful. She worked day and night, saving every naira she earned from her consulting job. While others spent their weekends relaxing, Ao was drafting business plans, researching supply chains, and building connections with small transport firms and warehouse managers. She knew the ins and outs of logistics, not just from books but from real experience. Years of handling her ex-husband's business documents had taught her how the industry really worked, who paid bribes, who cut corners, and more importantly, what companies desperately needed: honesty, efficiency, and someone who actually understood both numbers and people. So she registered her own company, Aya Holdings. The name was simple but powerful. It was her reclaiming her identity, her taking back control. She started small: a contract to deliver medical supplies to rural clinics, then a deal with a local food distributor. Slowly, her reputation grew. Within a year, Aya Holdings was bidding for bigger contracts. One, in particular, was for a cross-regional transportation project, the kind that would usually go straight to companies like Luoy's. But this time something shifted. His company's bid was overpriced, sloppy, and full of red flags. Aya's bid, clean, affordable, and well-structured. She didn't use her real name on the paperwork, just the business name, a registered manager, and the legal team she hired through her growing network. When the news came in that Luoy's company had lost the deal to a new but impressive logistics firm, he was furious. He ranted about corruption, favoritism, anything but his own poor management. He had no idea the woman behind Aya Holdings was the same woman he once made kneel. Ao didn't celebrate publicly. She didn't brag or gloat. She just stood by the window of her small office, looking out at the busy Tamale streets, a quiet smile on her face. She hadn't just escaped. It started with one random tweet. Someone dug up the old video, the one where Ao knelt in front of Luoy at that family dinner in Kumasi. The caption read, "This is not tradition. This is humiliation." Within hours, the video was all over TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. People were shocked, angry, heartbroken. The clip showed Ao trembling, kneeling on the floor, eyes full of tears, while Luoy stood over her, shouting like a king scolding a servant. In the background, people were eating, some even laughing. Not a single person stood up to help her. Influencers picked it up next. One called it a picture of modern-day emotional abuse dressed up as culture. Others tagged women's rights organizations, legal advocates, and TV stations. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag stand with Ao, hashtag kneel for no one, hashtag silent no more. But through all the noise, Ao said nothing. She saw the video. Of course she did. Friends from her past sent it to her asking, "Is this you?" She just replied with a quiet, "Yes." But she didn't explain. She didn't defend herself. She didn't even like or share a single post. She stayed silent, not out of fear but power. Because now her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. While the internet lit up with outrage, Ao kept working. She met clients, signed deals, and built new partnerships. Her business was growing fast, and now the world was catching fire on her behalf, without her lifting a finger. Meanwhile, back in Kumasi, Luoy was panicking. Reporters started calling his office. His clients began pulling out. His family was embarrassed. It was just a misunderstanding, he tried to say in one interview. But no one was listening. The internet had already made up its mind. Ao watched it all unfold from her small apartment in Tamale. Calm, focused. She didn't need to fight. The world was fighting for her now. One early morning in Kumasi, Luoy heard a knock on his office door. But it wasn't a client or a delivery. It was the government auditors and investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit. They walked in with files in hand and quiet authority in their voices. "We're here to conduct a full audit," one of them said. Luoy laughed nervously, trying to act calm. There must be a mistake. But it wasn't. The files they carried were detailed, with dates, signatures, transaction IDs, and even voice recordings. Every shady payment, every fake invoice, every shell company and cash deal done behind closed doors. It was all there. What Luoy didn't know was that the source of those files was someone he used to call just a housewife. Ao had kept every receipt, every email, every signed contract that broke the law. She had collected them quietly, calmly, when no one was paying attention. And now, those same files were in the hands of people with the power to destroy him. The investigation moved fast. Bank accounts were frozen. Properties were flagged. Clients began to cut ties, not wanting their names dragged into the mess. His brothers, cousins, and business partners called non-stop, asking what was going on. "Fix it," they yelled. But Luoy couldn't. The walls were closing in. The worst part? He still didn't know who had exposed him. His mother cried on the phone. His uncle blamed it on jealousy. But deep down, Luoy felt something chilling in his chest. A whisper of a thought he couldn't shake. Could it have been her? Meanwhile, Ao was in a boardroom in Tamale, closing a new logistics deal. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Prominent Kumasi businessman under investigation for fraud and tax evasion. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just looked out the window and whispered, one file at a time. The man who once made her kneel was now falling. Slowly, painfully, under the weight of the truth he thought would stay buried forever. The ballroom was packed. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. Business leaders from across the country filled the seats, waiting for the keynote speaker to walk in. The lights dimmed slightly, and an announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. Please welcome Ao Adubia, founder and CEO of Aya Holdings. The room broke into applause, and then silence fell as she appeared. Ao walked in wearing a flowing silk Kent gown that shimmered gold and burgundy under the lights. Her posture was straight, her head held high, and each step she took in her heels echoed like thunder across the marble floor. It wasn't just a walk, it was a statement. No one saw a quiet wife anymore. They saw a powerhouse, a survivor, a woman who built an empire from the ashes of her pain. As she walked to the stage, people leaned in closer. Some recognized her from the viral video. Others had read about Aya Holdings and its sudden rise in the logistics industry. But no one could have guessed the full story behind her calm eyes. She reached the podium, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the audience. There were no tears, no nerves. Just quiet power. My name, she began, voice steady, is Ao Adubia, and I am not here because life was kind. I am here because I refused to stay small. The crowd erupted into applause. Her name echoed in the room again and again, not whispered behind her back but shouted with pride. Back in Kumasi, someone watched the live stream on their phone with shaking hands. Luoy, the same man who once demanded she kneel, now watched the whole world rise to its feet. For her. And Ao? She didn't mention him once. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was louder than any apology he could have ever given. That night, the headlines didn't talk about scandal. They talked about strength. Ao Adubia, the woman who rose. The courtroom was silent, heavy with tension. Reporters filled the back rows. Lawyers shuffled through thick folders. The judge took her seat. Then the doors opened and in walked Luoy. No longer the proud, confident man who once barked orders at family dinners. His suit looked too big, like it couldn't fit over the weight of shame he carried. His eyes darted around the room, looking for a friendly face. There was none. He stood before the judge, hands clasped tightly, sweat gathering at his forehead. The same man who once forced Ao to kneel now stood trembling, his voice small. The clerk stood up. Luoy Mensah, you are charged with tax evasion, fraud, bribery, and destruction of public trust. How do you plead? There was a long pause. Then came a weak whisper. Not guilty. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow. Your documents say otherwise, she said, tapping a thick stack of evidence. Pages and pages. All too clear. All too real. Everything traced back to him, signatures, bank transfers, voice notes. The files Ao had collected were now the foundation of a case so strong, even his best lawyers couldn't talk it down. Luoy shifted on his feet. He looked broken, powerless, alone. The judge ordered the trial to move forward, and as he was led back out, a few cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled down every movement. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs. Justice for Ao. Stand up for survivors. No more silence. Somewhere in a different city, Ao sat in a quiet cafe, sipping tea as she watched the live news coverage on her phone. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just nodded once. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. The same man who forced her to kneel now stood before the law, not as a king, but as a criminal. And the world was watching. The auction was quiet, professional, held at a hotel ballroom in Kumasi. Lawyers sat with their clipboards. Bank officials nodded at bidders. One by one, Luoi's seized assets were put up for sale. Cars, land, even his office building. And then the final listing, his estate. The very house where he once humiliated Ao. The house where he forced her to kneel in front of his entire family, like she was less than human. The room hushed when the bidding started. It was a beautiful property, gated, spacious, well located. But no one expected the final bid to come from a woman in a bold emerald green suit, calm and collected. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She placed her bid and watched in silence as the hammer came down. Sold to Ms. Ao Adubia. There was a pause in the room. A few people gasped. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. They knew that name now. Everyone did. Weeks later, moving trucks pulled into the estate, but not to bring in luxury furniture or flashy cars. No, Ao had a different plan. She renovated the dining room, the very place she'd been forced to kneel, and turned it into a training center. The long, polished table was replaced with workstations, sewing machines, laptops, and shelves filled with books and notebooks. Upstairs, the guest rooms became safe spaces, beds for women escaping emotional abuse, women who had nowhere else to go. A big wooden sign stood outside the gate now. It read, Aya House for healing, for growth, for freedom. Ao walked through the halls of her new center, greeting women with a warm smile. She knew their pain. She had lived it. And now she was giving them what no one had given her: support, tools, and dignity. The same place that once broke her now stood as a place of rebuilding. She didn't just buy a house. She reclaimed her history. And then she rewrote it, for herself and every woman who thought silence was the only way to survive. After the court case and the auction, Luoi's family began to feel the heat. Their name was no longer respected. It was whispered with embarrassment. Clients cut ties, friends disappeared, and the very people who once praised their wealth started avoiding them in public. That's when the phone calls started. Ao's phone rang more than usual. Messages came in from unknown numbers. Hello, this is Auntie Efua. I just wanted to say we're proud of you. We didn't know what you were going through. Maybe you could come by for dinner sometime? The family would love to see you. These were the same voices that once laughed when she knelt. The same eyes that looked away while she was humiliated. The same mouths that said, "It's just how things are in marriage." Now they wanted to reconnect, pretending the past could be washed away with fake smiles and warm greetings. Ao didn't scream. She didn't curse them. She simply replied to one message with a single sentence. You only remember me when your empire collapsed. That message spread through the family group chats like wildfire. No one dared to respond after that. There was nothing left to say. She didn't go to their events. She didn't attend any family gatherings. She didn't need to. The woman they once looked down on was now a name they couldn't escape, on TV, in business circles, in headlines. Ao had no interest in revenge. She just had boundaries now. She had learned that silence could be louder than shouting, and walking away could be more powerful than staying to prove a point. In the end, she didn't slam any doors. She simply closed them, and locked them for good. Not out of hate but out of peace. She had healed. And in her healing, she had no space left for people who only showed up when the money disappeared and the damage was already done. The book launch was held in a beautiful garden venue in Accra. Rows of white chairs lined the lawn with fairy lights strung between the trees. The audience was filled with women, students, entrepreneurs, and even a few public officials. At the center of it all stood Ao, calm and radiant in a deep blue gown, holding her new book in hand. The title, Kneel for No One. It was more than a book. It was a story, a message, a declaration. Her journey from silence and humiliation to power and purpose was now written in her own words, on her own terms. During the Q&A session, a young journalist raised her hand and asked the question everyone was thinking. Ao, have you forgiven him? The crowd leaned in. Even the wind seemed to pause. Ao smiled. Not a cold smile. Not bitter. Just calm, wise, and full of clarity. Forgiveness, she said softly, is divine. She paused for a moment, letting the words hang in the air. But I gave him what he gave me publicly. The crowd gasped, then slowly erupted into applause. Some women stood up, clapping with tears in their eyes. Others nodded with quiet understanding. She didn't speak with anger. She didn't rant or tear him down. She just told the truth, raw, clear, and powerful. Ao didn't need revenge. She had something better. Truth, healing, and impact. Her words were changing lives now. Her pain had become a pathway for others to rise. And the man who once made her kneel? He was just a part of a past that couldn't hold her anymore. As the event ended and she signed books for a long line of readers, one woman whispered, "Your story saved me." Ao looked her in the eye and said, "Then it was worth it." The comeback wasn't loud. It was biblical. The final moment of her speech felt like thunder wrapped in silence. The crowd at the Women's Global Summit had been holding their breath, hanging on every word Ao said. She had taken them through her journey. The shame, the silence, the escape, and the transformation. And then, with a calm voice and fierce eyes, she delivered the line that would be shared by millions within hours. "I didn't kneel because I was weak. I knelt so I could rise taller than all of them." The room went still for a heartbeat. Then suddenly, like a wave crashing through the hall, the audience stood up. Chairs scraped the floor. Hands clapped wildly. Some people cried. Others just stood frozen, overwhelmed by the power of her story. It wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a moment in history. And that line? It was on TikTok by nightfall. On t-shirts the next week. Tattooed on a survivor's arm the month after. It traveled faster than fire, because every woman who had ever been shamed, silenced, or overlooked felt like it was written for her. Ao didn't just take her power back. She showed others how to do the same. And as she stood there, smiling gently, the cameras flashed and the applause rose louder. Not because she was famous, but because she was free. This time no one asked her to kneel. This time they stood for her.